Well, hello again.
Hi.
I'm Kopano, and this is Desmond, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Shall we start?
Right. Yes, let's start. So we thought we would make some of these short videos to sort of complement the formal lectures. What we'll do in 5 or 6 minutes, hopefully, we'll explore some of the themes in the chapters and around the chapters that you'll read in the textbook, or any other thing that we find relevant to the course.
And today we want to talk about something that appears in the textbook under 1.61. Right.
So that's chapter 1, basically section 6. And it's quite a useful, I think, in terms of how these, if you want to compare the different theories that we're going to discuss. So we're going to do theories that are quite different in terms of the assumptions they make and the way they approach, answer the question, what is a human being, what is a person? Psychoanalysis, behaviorism, humanism, and so on. So these concepts are personism, situationism,
Interactionism.
and interactionism. So these are useful. If you understand them, you can then say, okay, so where do I locate these different theories on this system, basically?
Right. But I wanted to say exactly that the more you read from next week, for instance, when you're reading and thinking about Freud, and we're talking about Freud, and then the week after we're talking about Skinner and other theorists as we go along, you can then map it onto these three things, basically. Yeah. So let's start with the first one, personism, also called mentalism.
Yes. So personism, basically, and in some ways it's really easy. It wants to reduce human behavior or explanation of human behavior to the person, to some internal world. Now that could be theorized in different ways. It could be the cognitive system, the information processing system. That would be a kind of mentalism. Or it could be, in Freud's theory, for example, the inner drives.
Right.
Everything is reduced back to almost like quasi-biological feature of humans, which he calls the drives, and we'll discuss that next week. But the important thing is to remember that behavior and even our understanding of personhood is brought back, and everything is understood in terms of the person.
So do you think that all or most, or at least the preponderance of our actions are explainable, explicable by what happens in the mind, in the psyche, or as we move on to the second one? So by the way, quickly, the word reduction, you will find it in other courses. So when we say it reduces, basically means it also goes to this reductionism. When they say reductionism, it basically you reduce things to some essence,
yes,
in one sense. Yeah. The second thing is situationism. I said in the lecture I'm more inclined to be a situationist, but sometimes I do think there is something about people that differentiates them, and it might be what happens out of the situation, emerges out of the situation, but sometimes I think it's something that happens inside them. I don't know what the inside is, so as you know, we always discuss this. So situationism says behavior is explained by what happens in the situation. So the situation determines behavior. An extreme form of this was the work of B.F. Skinner, who we will deal with in the third week.
So you can see that already. Again, we say the extreme version, because not everyone adopts the same, is not equally extreme in the way they adopt these things. So an extreme personist would say everything can be understood or explained in relation to the internal psychology of people. The situationist would seem every behavior, all behavior, can be understood in relation to the situation. Right? And the situation means the stuff that happens. Like
Stuff that happens in the family.
Yeah.
That when you are, an example, when you are amongst your friends and they're drinking a bit, that you also might drink a little more than usual if you are a drinker. If you are in a crowd, you do what the crowd does. So situation means that the context, what happens outside of the surface of the skin, the surface of the body, all of that. Yeah.
So you might remember in first year perhaps you did some social psychology. There's this famous experiment by Stanley Milgram where he had people administer shocks to others. And that was an interesting, because there the question really is, are people cruel? For example, if you were a Nazi soldier in Auschwitz, did people engage in those actions because there's something evil about them, or can you explain it in reference to their personality? Or is it because that was the rules of the, I was just following orders?
Right.
Or
And people said this, by the way.
Yeah, people said it. People
Quite.
said, no, it's not, I'm not an evil guy. I go home, I'm kind and friendly to my wife and my daughter. But this was how things were done.
Okay, question again. I mean, in that context, so the first part of the question is, do you think the preponderance, the majority of our behaviors, or all of it, is explained by the situation? So that's the first part of the situation. But for yourselves, if you are in I'm old now. I've been doing this, in this position for how many years? Over 25 as professor. But sometimes with friends, right? Again, the example of the alcohol. I think I've had too much wine right now. Why was that? Was it because the party was a great situation, I was enjoying myself? Or is it something about me? And sometimes I suspect maybe I am addicted to alcohol, right? So that's the question you ask. Would you, if you're in a situation where the people are administering shocks or you're a soldier, would you say no? That would mean you have a strong, sometimes it's called character, right? That you have a really strong character, or are you likely to do what other people do? The last one, quickly, interactionism.
Yeah. So that's an easy one. In some ways, psychologists say that it's a little bit of both. Some psychologists will say interaction means that basically behavior can be understood in relation to personality dynamics or how your mind works, but also in reference to the situation, the context, which could be the small situation, like a small group of people, but also larger kind of situations, like a cultural situation or whatever.
And most psychologists, I think many, if not most psychologists, tend to do this, right? That they take a little bit of that, a little bit of Freud, a little bit of CBT. Okay, this is what we. So stuff happens there, and one of the approaches, specific approaches, is what's called ecological approaches or ecosystemic. That they say behavior is determined by what happens at different levels. So what happens inside yourself, in the family, in a larger context, for instance, a nation. So, if you're explaining what happens, the violence in South Africa, it emerges out of what happens inside of the person. They can't control their impulses, what happens to the family, the way they were brought up, and lastly, the nation itself, because the policing is not great. So those are the three things.
Yeah.
What's your view? Where do you fit in? Yeah. And don't take the easy way out, like a bit of both.
Yes. Thank you. We'll discuss more of this in class.
See you next time.
See you.
Bye-bye.